So I think before the conversation starts, I'll just share a few words on the spirit behind the show. This show does bring together 5 artists, all of whom have done a residency with STPI. So we do have the recent projects by artists Janice Kerbel, Angela Bulloch, and Tobias Reberger, who unfortunately is the only one who couldn't join us this evening, but he do send his regards. So I think then when putting together the show, we also did wanted to find kindred artistic investigations, and that's really where the projects of Pei White and Richard Deacon came about. So thinking about things like exploring the spaces between dimensions, various ways of thinking about typology and systems of languages, as well as ideas of perceiving and perception. At the same time, this show really is that homage to the precious relationships and friendships forged between the artists and the creative workshop team with each and every residency. This relationship is really at the heart of what STPI does, where artists would propose radical ways of thinking about printmaking and papermaking, sometimes going even beyond the realms and the academy of these two disciplines into a totally new territory. And to the workshop's credit, there's an enduring spirit of never say no and open-ended explorations, which does result in the body of works that you see here today. So before, again, going into the talk, I'll take some time to introduce each artist so that we get a bit more familiar with each of their practices. We have Angela Bulloch with us, who works across sound, installation, and sculpture to explore the intersections of art, mathematics, and design. Her focus on systems, patterns, and rules is accompanied by an interest in how they structure social behavior, resulting in works that blur the boundaries between the digital and the analog, virtual and tangible. We also have Richard Deacon, who creates biomorphic sculptures that explore the interplay between interior and exterior, mass and lightness, movement and stillness, constantly experimenting with industrial and domestic materials such as plywood, stainless steel, leather, and clay. His sculptures evoke a sense of the body, interacting dynamically with the audience and surrounding architecture. We have Janice Kerbel with us at the end, who creates narratives that explore the realization of impossible events and encounters. Her work involves extensive research into diverse topics such as botany, crime, theater, architecture, and sports, whose languages and systems she distills to build a direct engagement with the viewer's senses and imagination. Last but not least, we have Pei White as well, who works across sculpture, painting, installation, and graphic design to explore the overlooked and ephemeral qualities of everyday life. Using common materials such as yarn, paper, birdseed, and glass, her practice blurs the traditional boundaries between fine and applied arts, subverting perceptions of familiar objects, processes, and spaces. And today, the conversation will be moderated by none other than Jim Amberson, an arts patron and collector among the many other shoes that he fills, and a great friend to STPI. So without further ado, I'll pass over the time to Jim.
Thank you, everybody. I'm really glad that you all made it here. As you can see, I arrived a little bit late. I had to wait for a very long time for my grab. Thank you very much for coming with the weather being a little bit inclement the last couple of days. One of the things that's a bit interesting and different about this particular exhibition is most of the time when we have exhibitions at STPI, it's following on an artist's residency and often a solo exhibition of the work that they created during their time at STPI. And when artists are doing a residency at STPI, most of the time they're alone. It's one artist at a time, focused with a particular period of time, usually around 3 weeks, often with 2 sections that they have for that residency. And that work is in collaboration with the wonderful team in the workshop, and results in the beautiful works that we've been fortunate to see, witness, and live with here in Singapore and elsewhere. But it's very rare that we have multiple artists who come together for an exhibition or at a time to go and talk about their times at STPI. And I think this is such a rare opportunity. I thought that was one of the questions that I suggested to the group of artists that we have here today, is to sort of talk a bit about their experience here and their interaction during this exhibition, and to talk a bit about the art making process. I think for many of us, we focus on the finished works that grace the gallery, but not that much about the process of art making and the creating of art. And I think that's where there's a bit of a difference in the way of the perspective that the collectors and patrons have in viewing the works that are created at STPI, as opposed to those, the perspective of the artists who are residents. And so I thought if we could maybe sort of kick that off, and maybe Angela, you're right here. Maybe you could start that.
Good evening. The process, to speak about the process. Well, I came here not knowing what I was going to do, but having some ideas about general directions, what I normally am interested in to pursue. So I was halfway through developing this app that I was using. So that was an obvious thing. In order to have something to scan, I needed to develop some QR codes that were much more beautiful for the human eye. That was one idea that I had, and that's something I could go straight ahead with. But other than that, I mean, I really, all the works are based on something else which is not here somehow. So it's kind of got 1 foot here and 1 foot somewhere else. You know, with the AR works, it's obviously they function as a portal to another experience. With the laser off prints, that's just a technique that we developed here through series. That was really coming out of a process, how to produce something from the removal of ink rather than the putting on of it. So that revealed itself in the process. I could say more, but I think maybe it's good to hear from everyone, right?
Okay, yes. I think, Richard, your residency was one of the furthest back. Yes. Of the 4 that we have here. Thinking back on your residency, about the process of art making and working in print, because you're more known for working in 3 dimensions, if I remember it correctly.
I'm a sculptor, but I've made a lot of prints in my life, and I've always liked the physical process of printmaking. I do a lot of drawing as well, but the printmaking is a material process in a way that I like and I respond to, and the materials that I've used, even actually from the time I was making prints at school, made lithographs, and I was using a stone, a zinc plate, and creating the image by rubbing out on the zinc plate, and then on foundation studies, printing on plastic, because I got interested in polythene bags, which with shoppers' insignia on, and making. It's kind of a practice that's kind of woven in and out of what I'm doing. But the big difference when you come here is that it's normally in a print shop, it's you and a printer. It's a kind of one-to-one relationship. But here, there's 10 of them, 15 of them, and they're all energetic, informed, and you have to run to keep up. And this is really quite exciting as an artist. I had some notions about what I wanted to do when I came here, and marbling had kind of propped into my head. And this is something that the team hadn't done before. But they very quickly learned the basics, and we worked out how to do it together. But there is this kind of extraordinary interchange that goes on. I mean, it's also, I have to say, slightly easier to be inside in Singapore than it is outside sometimes. So, you know, being in the workshop's actually very comfortable, you know, and it can be a bit sweaty outside. And so, you know, there is that as well. You said something in the beginning about interchange between artists. That we've had here. I mean, the nice thing about doing a group show, particularly if you're not in competition for space, is that you get to talk to other artists about, and get to spend time looking at their work, you know, and kind of have interchange, because there's no, the show's curated, there's no sense in which you're installing the work yourself. So you're in this very relaxed position of being able to talk to people whose work you respect and who you're interested in, and to have a kind of discourse about it. And also, because we've all been through the same experiences of being in Singapore, that's kind of woven in with just the experience of being here. None of us come from Singapore, so we've all come in as strangers.
Okay. I mean, hey, we'll get back to my original question, but to kind of take off on what Richard just said, that I think the experience of being in Singapore and exploring the city was something that you mentioned about that played a role in what you created during your residency. And maybe you could speak on that and then get back to the other questions about the interchange of artists and the process of printmaking. Yep.
Sure, okay, just was sure it's on. Yeah, I mean, I came here and I had some ideas I put together kind of as a courtesy, and then just tossed them all and really decided to make the place part of the raw material for the subjects that I chose to do. I was here during the Hungry Ghost Festival, so that kind of worked its way into the work. But also just being in the city and just wandering the streets was really, really important. I don't think that comes up enough in the conversations about residencies, is that the place is critical. It's not just, you know, here are the tools and this and that, but the parentheses is the location. And I had never been to Singapore, and it really delivered even more than I could have imagined. So that was quite critical as a subject, as were the people and the level of skill, which isn't always available to an artist. And take advantage of that. And it was really just every day, like, can we do this? Can we? And I don't think I ever heard no. And there's something that we work on in my studio today that started here, but it's a variation of what I mean, that was 2019, and we're still expanding upon it. But yeah, it's great to be here, and I mean, I know Angela and Janice, but meet Richard, and just to see the kind of overlaps of work that in many ways feels very different, but to find that kind of common thread that isn't just about being in this workshop with these tools and these skilled masters, but just other things. We've talked about our work a lot in the past few days, so I'm always finding different interesting connections.
And Janice, sort of getting back to the idea of the interchange with the other artists, but also for the few of us that were here last night, it was just, for me, a real treat to see, as the artists explained their works, that all of the other artists are sitting there looking, you know, it's short of a magnifying glass, of trying to see how the techniques were done, what was the approach that was done, and the level of curiosity was just palpable. And I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about that with regard to your experiences as well as your works that are on exhibit.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I was thinking about and that we talked about is it's there's something really particular, I think, about this exhibition, which is a group exhibition, but it's also very small. So you actually have the opportunity to look quite closely at everyone's work. And one thing I was thinking about when you noted that we were like all kind of gathering around the work and trying to like reverse engineer it, was one thing I was thinking about wasn't only about how did they do this, but like one thing I'm really preoccupied is how did you get to that place of making those decisions? And I found that a really, which of course you can't see in the work, but that's something that really led my curiosity. Maybe because we have this shared experience of working in the same workshop with, you know, the same or similar groups of people over a large period of time. And one thing I was thinking about in terms of like this, the way to approach, because I'm trying to remember what the first question was now.
It was a bit more about the art making process and how you engaged with the STPI workshop on the process of art making, and I guess building on that, how were you making those decisions that you made?
One thing that I was very surprised by in the process of making the work is that I tend to have quite a solitary practice, but at the same, and I did for a long time, and then I started to work more in performance and found that very liberating, that you would have to, you know, you could get the work to a certain point and then it became very collaborative, and then it opened up into what its form would be. And my experience of print up to this point had not been that. It had been solely solitary, and then, you know, trying to get it out of the computer, trying to get it off my desk. And this was very different. It was much more like my experience of working in performance, where you joined this team in the workshop and everyone worked together, and it was about this kind of complete shared expertise where you were part of the team. It wasn't just you and a team, it was everyone working together.
You made a reference to working, how something comes out of the computer. And I think one of the things that was interesting during the discussions that we had is the role of technology. And I think oftentimes when we think about the printmaking process, it's often sort of expected as this very sort of physical, tactile kind of process, which is not necessarily what we ordinarily think of when we're talking about the interaction of technology. Almost like the removal of the person, the removal of tacticity and such. So I'm curious if you could maybe build on how your practice with the computer informed, changed what and how you're approaching printmaking, or how it fits into your overall ordinary practice that you had, you know, before the residency with STPI.
Something I think a lot about, and I have a feeling everyone here might have a similar experience, is that I do actually think that we kind of have to push back on this idea that working digitally is not a material practice, because I think it is. And I think the time spent moving things around, changing things, is really about trying to acknowledge the materiality of that space. Yeah.
I also think that working on a computer is a material practice, and there's a very nice interface on a computer that Angela explores very beautifully with trying to work out, and I think we've all got this kind of fantastic opportunity at the moment, or that as artists we are engaged with material stuff, but there's also this kind of other world which is kind of opened up in the last 15, 20, 30 years or so, where you enter into another kind of space, a space, and Andrea describes it very well as being limitless, and that, but it's limitless but not immaterial. That's the interesting thing, I mean, I think artists kind of engage with stuff that they don't necessarily have big ideas. The ideas come out of the things as you're going along. And in a way, having big ideas is a kind of doesn't really help, really, because you start just executing them rather than exploring them. So I mean, I think there's quite a nice interface between the folds and the swimming pools and the both the marbled water, the surface of the water and the marbling, and the images of water and the kind of uncertainty in the image, which is generated. Yeah, it's always a pleasure to discover another artist's material practice.
So Richard was kind enough to mention your work several times, and I was curious if you could provide a bit more context about your practice with the computer and the specific works that you created for this exhibition.
Oh, sorry, I'm holding this like I own it.
Well, I mean, I think the computer is the fabulous tool from the last, 30 years that I've been using. But I think that's really shared. It's something, the ubiquity of the personal computer is something that is made a kind of enormous democracy of, this access, and then the internet on top of that. It connects people, and it is a space. It is like a material practice. It is something that I think we all are, more or less engaged with each other because of the internet and this connectivity. So, I mean, within specific works of mine, I am thinking about a question of scale and the limitlessness of it and the connectivity of things, but in this rather more abstract mathematical kind of way, or non-Euclidean, like I've described. But I think that's something that everybody has an imagination for, and that exists in us as humans rather than in the computers themselves. So, yeah.
But I think when we were discussing it last night, you made a comment about how game technology had played a role in the development of these works. That's not, I mean, often, okay, I confided that the last time I played a video game, it was Pac-Man. So I'm hardly the most au fait with what's going on in the whole gaming technology. But perhaps you could talk a bit about how that sort of virtual environment became part of the works that you were doing and created for this residency.
Well, because of working on a computer, it really does bring to mind a manifest idea of space. And I think that's something that we all can just share immediately. I mean, you mentioned about Pac-Man. I mean, that's from the 80s, I guess, and but there are so many different developments of games and ways of learning things and stuff where the spatialization is something that you have to imagine it. But it's not really only about the development of the computer, but it's the development of the imagination, I think, because that's the spaces we all share. It is really like a meta space, a mental kind of area, rather than a digital computer thing, because they only exist because we have the power of our imaginations.
Okay. And Pei, in your practice, the works that were created for the residency, dealing with stencils and dealing with the letters and such, I guess if we're talking about democratization of images or such, that seems to transition quite well with what you created during your residency. If you could perhaps speak a little bit about how technology does or does not inform or involve your practice, and that might be interesting to sort of see how it fits with the gambit.
I mean, I think 90% of what I do in the studio, or my studio does, starts digitally, and but we're also very careful that that is not so foregrounded, and that it's really just at the beginning, and that we balance it out with some maybe sense of something that feels more tactile, or there's something that's more maybe obviously human, or but there is an interface for sure, but I think everything here has a digital origin for sure, and you know, bookmaking is all done digitally anyway, but this is a very basic book, but absolutely it all starts that way.
So,
I'll tell you a couple of stories. My father was a pilot. He spent his life in high-end machines. My mother was a doctor, but when I was 18, she developed motor neuron disease. And for a while, she deteriorated quite rapidly. And for a while, lost the power of speech and had this kind of wreck of a body. And when I was a student, one day I suddenly got a letter from her. And because she was a doctor, she'd been given a very advanced servo mechanism that enabled her to, because she retained control over the movement of her head, to type using a machine called a possum, passenger-assisted servo mechanism, something like that. The thing about it was that it was, the grammar was exactly her grammar. So technology gave me my mother back. It was just the most fantastic experience. And ever since then, I've thought that this technology interface I've had positive feelings about it. And the question about gaming, it's gaming that's driven the development of AI. And it's people wanting to play games that have developed the NVIDIA chips and has the capacity to, it hasn't been so much the research in the universities, it's been kids playing games that have driven the development of AI. Play is quite important.
Just to add one more thing to that, Demis has a business, the person who pretty, not single-handedly, but who built the company that's in Britain, in any case, developing a very AI in the current field. He's recently received the Nobel Award for chemistry, and the digital interface of being able to basically use AI as a tool to predict the way that proteins will fold in order to create every kind of molecular man-made medicines or polymers or proteins, basically. These are the stuff of life. So it's the DNA molecules of different type of proteins that are on that double helix structure. If you can predict how a protein will fold, it means that you can actually make all sorts of proteins. And this is the area of AI research, which is most fascinating to me, actually. But Demis has a business. This very particular person, he spent many years of his youth really developing video games. I mean, he and went on to Cambridge and to, they were bought out by Google, and now they're up in, King's Cross. And just the name of the company escapes me right now, but, what? Arm? No, it's not. It's they're another big, anyway, it'll come to me, but I'll pass the mic on.
I was curious, following on the residency that you had at STPI, actually, wait, we'll ask that one later.
The name of this Deep Mind.
Deep Mind, yes, okay. So I was curious, okay, let me step back. I was curious, with the work that you've presented here, if you could each say a few comments. I think Richard commented about the marbling using water as the printing plate, as a way of stepping off. But I'm curious if you could talk about with regard to the process, some of the things that you did with the work that you did here that was somewhat unique and different. I think your comment about the flux. If you could maybe speak a little bit about that and how that came about and how you developed that.
Well, flocking is something that has been used in wallpaper for years. It gives it a dimensionality, a velvet quality, and it's usually an embellishment. And we tried to use it in my studio, and we really failed. So it's my familiarity of it is as a monochrome, and this is a process that involves millions of fibers that receive a negative charge, and then the paper is grounded. So it's like an electromagnetic process. And we were able to use multicolor of this, which I found very, very unusual because it's like blending dust with an addition. So there's, again, trying to keep things without too much variation. And I mean, my feeling here is that every material and process has a secret. You just have to kind of unlock it somehow and take it to the next level. And I still have never seen anything quite like what we did here in that process.
And then I think, Janice, could you speak just a little bit about the edges of your work? Because I think your work's quite subtle, and if you could speak a bit about the edges and what we should be, or a bit about that process.
Actually, it took a lot of convincing from the team to keep the edges. When we started making the pools, I was thinking about this kind of like a topology of these pool shapes, and we went through many of them, and I was thinking of printing them, and we tried lots and lots of different things, and it was a point at which we decided to abandon the printing of them and to treat the paper as the pool itself. And when Gordon, who was making them, because we cut them out of like newsprint, and I thought, oh, that's perfect, you know, and then, but still wanted to go through another process. We started making them out of paper, and the edges of the paper itself, it would have been my instinct to just really then scalpel it and make it really clean, but they felt a bit like the kind of water that seeps over the edge of a pool. And I was really concerned with this idea of the surface of things, like, you know, what's behind and what's above. And had that kind of edge had a relationship to the paper that you see when you buy it off the shelf as well. So again, it returned it back to the conditions of the paper. And I really, really loved that, actually.
And then,
yeah, I would say about that, I mean, I think that the way the edge is done mediates between the outside and the inside in a really, really interesting way when you focus on it. If you cut a cut edge with a scalpel, it would be too extreme. There's this very nice transitional on the edge, which is really very good.
But that's something I think that's really important about working in a place like this, that you find yourself in a position where you can let go of your preconceived idea of what you think you know. And, you know, had I been working alone and just send it out, I would always be like, no, cut it, you know.
Didn't you say earlier that edge is created by water cutting?
Exactly.
And that's something that I didn't know existed of it. That's something I learned from you. It's cut by water, I presume, right?
Absolutely.
Is it a fast jet of water that...
Yeah, like a water pick. You know,
Okay.
I don't know. We'd have to ask Gordon. I don't know what.
Let's
they
ask
call it.
Gordon.
But I think this is one of the things that's interesting is that this opportunity allowed you to collaborate and also to trust the team to say, okay, let me not follow my instinct. Let me be open to try to explore differently. And has that changed what you're creating afterwards?
For me, I hope so. You know, that you can enter a work not knowing. I mean, I think that's what we all try and do. I think it's the only way to survive as an artist is to not know. But you get to places where it's easier to know. So a place like this does remind you, and I think that lasts a long time, that you don't need to know. Yeah.
I think, Angela, your residency was also not that long ago. So in terms of working with the materials and changing that, you said you had the AI, or had this app that you were working on, and then you had these ideas within your computer in terms of the Euclidean, but you referred to it really briefly, but if you could explain a little bit more about the process by which it was not the conventional print.
Yeah, it was something new that came out of experimenting, trying to produce a pattern that I do know, but in a different way. And so we called it, in the end, we called it laser off. So it's like the removal of the ink in very fine layers, and using the printing device, the laser printer, in a way which is contradictory, you know. So it's kind of using a regular laser printer to remove the ink rather than put it onto the paper.
So the works started all black.
Yeah, we found a new way of making the same end result, which was much more like a kind of analog feeling, actually. So it was very oddly convoluted, a process that went through a machine and testing the edges of that machine to make something that was very tactile and un-machine-like.
And then I think, Richard, with the marbling technique that you did, that led to these three-dimensional structures. If you could maybe speak a little bit about the marbling technique with the individual sheets of paper, as well as the end results and the reference that you had in creating those.
Okay, so I could also talk a lot about the surface of water, but we'll, and what it means to go through the surface of water. The sheets came out and they're double-sided, and so then you do have a problem of how you show them, because you put them on the wall, then one side is hidden. But I'd also been thinking about folding things up anyway, so the dividing, making these sort of prisms of geometrical forms allowed me to construct a form that had an inside and an outside. And I said that the works are called housing, and they do have some relationship to the experience of housing, of looking at the housing blocks in Singapore and being interested about how they're put together, both as sculptural items. But I also think that, as I've said several times, I think that the social engineering involved in the construction of the housing units is also equally interesting. So the construction here has some relationship to things I'd done in ceramics previously, where elements were kind of joined together to form complicated wholes. And then works which I then went on to make on in steel later, which are use the folded edge to construct a form. So there is a kind of conversation between a folded enclosure and so these sit in a conversation about a folded enclosure. But I also there's also a kind of consequence in terms of the fact of using the surface of water to print on, and a transfer between the water surface and things that I did subsequently. During the pandemic, I did a lot of drawings, which I first started off by then spraying in water and using blotting paper to extract them. And then a transfer, then I started working on lithographic transfers, which is also a water-based process. The paper is has a the coating on the paper is water soluble. So you use an ink to make the greasy mark to make the drawing on the paper, and then it's put on the stone, and then you wet the back of the paper, and the drawing drops off the paper onto the stone, and so then water becomes is also a means of transfer, etc. Then, so one of my favorite books when I was growing up was a book called Creatures of the Surface Film, which is about surface tension and the animals that live on the surface tension. So, and I used to swim, and I used to swim a lot, and I still love that thing between above the water and below the water, and what you see, and all the metaphors about that arise in being able to cross that boundary.
I'm trying to remember, last evening, one of the other artists talked about the space of horizons and where things happen. That was Pei, right? Yeah, this sort of line between above the water and below the water, and this idea of horizons and how that instructs your practice.
Well, I think I live on a hilltop in Los Angeles, and the horizon is always there, and it's I mentioned earlier, I have a tendency to just get lost all the time, and so it's sort of my anchor. And a horizon was the sort of the color motif for those letter forms, and they're quite. It's dawn or dusk for me. It could be either.
One of the things I was curious, and maybe I'll start with Janice. When you came for the residency, I mean, Pei mentioned, she said, I had all these ideas and I threw them all out. When you approached, did you have a fairly strong idea of what you were planning to do, or did that sort of change after you got here? And the other thing that I'm curious about is, did you go through the back room and see what other artists had created during their residencies and sort of peek around?
I didn't go through the back room. As the first question, I mean, I went through the library, and I did wonder, but that was more a kind of curiosity about other artists as opposed to informing how I was approaching it. And I didn't know, I came with an idea that I wanted to make this giant joke book, but I only had one joke, so that was kind of a problem. But I did try, and we did spend a lot of time on this. And actually, that's something that I haven't let go of, and I still, I keep trying to work this out in different forms. So I do think it's actually, but swimming pools were something I had been thinking about for a long time previously, because I had been working with swimmers and in a pool, and I swim a lot. So I often find this happens with my own practices. I'll have an idea, and then I have to kind of wait for it to become obsolete before I can actually do it. And then like that really old idea becomes possible. So that there's always that kind of interchange. So although And I do think that experience of making that new thing, which was an old thing, invariably enables you to make the thing you thought you were going to make. Yeah.
Angela, did you have a firm idea of what you were thinking of doing, or did you peek around and see the techniques and stuff that
I'm
others
just
had?
naturally curious, so of course I want to put my nose in and see what other people have done, of course. But I couldn't really tell very much because, I mean, it's easy to see, for example, Tobias's work when it's all on the wall and finished and like this, but I didn't know anything about this, the printing on the tablecloth and the napkins. But I mean, I could only see what was in the grids, and that's partial and not. It's just not clear. And you need maybe, to see it in another form to actually gain a kind of real insight or value from what other artists have done. It just become revealed to me what Janice has been working on, because I could just see some subtle things, but it's only clear because you're here and I see the work and I hear you speak about it. That makes it much more vivid. Yeah. I just wanted to say one more thing about process, if that's okay. I've been coming here, it feels like on a pattern. It's like every 6 months I've been coming back for a little while, and I sort of actually don't really think that the process is over yet. Perhaps I'm overstepping, but I could imagine to continue to work. It's not something I'm really willing to leave. In fact, you might, see me back here again, so.
I think that's one of the things that has been wonderful about the STPI residencies is there has been a sort of it's encouraged that a number of artists who have done a residency come back. And I think, I'm curious, what did you told your friends and colleagues, the artists that you associate with in Berlin? What have you said to them about your experience here in Singapore?
I kind of try to keep it like this compelling secret. I say a little bit, but not too much, because it's something you have to actually learn by looking through the different works that people have done. It's not hard to just say it all in one go, but it's really about the process of, that's the enjoyable thing from my point of view, is the process that it gives you to actually fulfill the ideas that you want to manifest things. Okay. That's a fantastic thing.
Yeah. I think, Richard, what have been the discussions that you've had with artists in the UK about your experience here? Is it something that you've sort of kept as a secret that you didn't really want to share, or?
A couple of artists who were invited here after I'd done phoned me up to ask me how it was, and in both cases I said, just do it. It's a fantastic thing. You won't get it. You won't get anything like it. And they were nervous, and I just said, you get a fantastic welcome. It's if you come here for 3 weeks and do one thing, that's fine. If you come here for 3 weeks and do 200 things, that's equally fine. There's no pressure either way. Did I look at other things before I came, or when I first came? The only, not particularly, except I was kind of interested in some of the paper pulp images made in paper pulp. At some point I thought, oh, that would be interesting to explore. So even the ones that were done before STPI started, with stuff that Ken Tyler had done. But coming here, the boundaries do shift a bit, about what things could happen.
I think, although Tobias is not here, your comment about the paper pulp. For everybody sitting in this room, the colorful works that are here is a result of colored paper pulp that was put together, and then there is a light printing over the paper pulp that creates the other colors. I think, correct me, Jefferson, if I said that incorrectly. Hopefully I got that straight. So that's one of the things that's quite interesting is, changing the whole idea of
There's also something else. You can fight against it or not, but the fact to be in a place that makes the material you make the mark on is really quite interesting. It's like I said this afternoon. It's like if I was in a steel mill when they were making steel and then working with the steel. That's there's something very because your size is then. The size of the piece of paper isn't particularly standard. It can be whatever size, not whatever size, but it can be quite big, a piece of paper.
So I think, for a long time I used to joke that STPI, the P actually should have been paper rather than print, because it's such a unique resource about being able to do that. And very few print organizations have the capabilities of paper that STPI has. That said, it's a bit interesting. Your approach to the paper that you used for your work kind of goes against that. And maybe you could speak a little bit about the approach that you took on the paper stock.
It's very, I used to work in a print studio, so I'm familiar with working with handmade paper, and there's an inherent warmth and humanity and beauty and poetic in that paper, and it's very hot in that way. So I needed to kind of play with the dials of minimizing that, and that's why we use the commercial paper just off the shelf and just keep it, kind of calm it down. But with the book that's on display, Gordon just brought a lump of mulberry pulp and just slapped it on the table. And rather than take it to the next step and make paper out of it, it's just, as I mentioned earlier, it's just like, let's just show the guts. And let's make the guts the sort of stained glass or whatever, but let's not take it to its most, its next poetic life. And I think it's as beautiful in a way. But it was for me kind of balancing that inherent handmade paper beauty, which I fully embrace, but it kind of keeping it a little bit on the calmer side.
I think, and Janice, talking about paper, your work with the edges, but the other part is the folds, which is part of the paper. And if you could maybe speak a bit about that.
Yeah, I think there was, the folds obviously are now integrated in that paper. You can't get them out. But there was also about the quality of the paper that I was after that was really important. And I'm thinking about what you were saying, Paige, like how to make paper where it has a particular quality, like a robust quality, has a kind, still feels like it has a practical application, which is not just for art making. That was really important to me in the making of that paper, and a lot of back and forth. And the back and forth, that's how we came to the folds, because I started to think about these when I first was here in 2019 and was intending to return shortly after, like, I can't remember, say 8 months after, 6 months after, and then that was COVID. So there was, we tried to do this on Zoom and try different ways, which was, seemed like it would be possible, was kind of missing the point of this kind of collaborative process where you can stay open, like I said, to not knowing, because it's really about looking and touching and exploring that way. But the folds then was a way to send material, to send these pools back and forth. So I wanted them to fit into an A3 envelope. As I've said a couple times over the past few days, you could only fold a paper 7 times before it starts to not want to fold. So that's how the scale was determined.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And I think I was curious whether there were any questions from people in the audience that they have for these 4 artists? Okay. If,
Maybe I have one.
okay.
So what's the most unique thing you experienced with paper so far? Unique thing, like when you use papers and medium.
Well, it's not here. We made these folded paper things that were, and we had this huge liquid mass of paper, and we were stuffing cloths underneath it and kind of trying to get it to fold. That was pretty funny. It's gathered around this huge wet piece and getting it to hold a fold. That was different from the folding that went into the marble pieces. So the fold is a structure, and there's either a geometric or a organic kind of fold.
Well, think if there's any other questions?
I can
Okay.
answer the question as well, because I used paper pulp to make a stone with. I made a stone out of paper, so it's not, I don't know, it's not unique, but it is a transubstantiation, maybe. Rochambeau, rock, paper, stone, rock, paper, scissors, sorry.
Hi, I'm a student who just graduated from RCA. And can you give me some advice on how do I start a career as an art student?
Do lots of work.
The question is what? How do you start?
A career as an art student.
You don't have a career. You don't set out to have a career as an artist. That's the answer to that question. A career, there isn't a career. It doesn't work like that.
Question for Janice. So I think at the start you were talking about the idea of you working very solitary and then doing performance, which is gets to a point where you can't really collaborate. So I just wanted to you working with workshop staff and you as a collaborator. Was this process? Was there any thought about this process being performative, or is there sort of choreography or some sort of?
I didn't think about it so much in terms of choreography, but what I did notice is that I kind of found a way, or without consciously thinking about this, is that when I would work with people with very particular skills, I would know I kind of knew what I wanted from them, and then you have to let go because they're actually what they can offer is so much better than what you thought about anyways. So in that respect, that's how it was performative, or that's how it was like balancing this thing between, I don't know, something that like that you score, that you write, that you want to hold on to, and the other things that are much more spontaneous. Yeah. So if that's performative, I don't know, but yeah. But like when someone enacts a script, there's something that's written, but then they bring something else to it. So perhaps. Thanks. But maybe that's something, that one of you guys can reflect on too, right? Like performative aspect of like working together with people.
I mean, I think when you have people who have such a high skill level, but it's an interesting dynamic because they're deferring, and yet you're also deferring. So to get to that point where you kind of let them lead or come up with the best scenarios, and it's hard to describe, but it is a. Yeah, there's a mutuality, and being comfortable with that is very, very interesting.
Well, I've made performance work, and I've made collaborative work, and there is, and I've worked with dancers, I've worked with the theatre, and I work with people who really know what they're doing in terms of making stuff, and what works really well is when you start to trust each other, and that's when things kind of happen. Whoever you're working with starts to think, yeah, I think this, and he thinks that, but there's some way in which the thing starts to come together as a collaboration. There is a bit of an enigma that I get my name on the end, and sometimes people who put in a lot don't get their names on the end. So that's a kind of art world problem, I think. But really, a lot of art making is kind of it has aspects of collaboration and shared, and sharing can be done. Is done by well, like learning to trust each other. That someone knows what they're doing.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed the opportunity to speak with the four of you, and I hope you enjoyed this evening's discussion. If you have specific questions for one of the artists, or if hearing them talk about their work is so much more insightful than a talented docent or others. So if you take advantage of that opportunity. But anyway, thank you very much, and appreciate you coming this evening.
Thank you very much once again to all of our speakers here, and thank you everyone for coming down here tonight as well. So the night is just beginning. We do have some wine in the corner, so please help yourself to some drinks, and please take the time to walk around the space to encounter all the works we have here. Thank you.